It's my privilege now to move into the next segment of our program where we're focusing on housing, and we have two guests. One from BC Housing, Sarah Goldvine, who's Vice President there. And our first presenter is President of the BC Seniors Living Association, Graham Freeman. And he has just come back from a very intensive week running a conference for his association. So we appreciate very much him making time for us. So I will we'll move over to camera 2 and turn it over to Graham.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you for using a much younger photo of myself on that intro. Thank you. Thank you to the BC Retired Teachers Association for this opportunity. The BC Senior Living Association is a mix of for-profit and not-for-profit operators of retirement residences in BC. And our purpose is largely in advocacy and lobbying at different levels of government, as well as promoting the collaboration between those serving seniors, ultimately protecting choice for seniors. There is a demographic wave upon us that will require support in all housing types and also significant labor support. This wave will require all options available, and collectively, I'll be honest, we're far behind delivering the capacity on both housing and labor. My personal story is not of much relevance, but briefly, my parents were owner-operators, and so I've largely grown up in the industry my whole life. And over the last 20 years, I've worked with some prominent brands and definitely most of the models available. In connection with this organization, my wife is a teacher of 23 years, elementary school, and so soon we may be your members. I'm not here today to promote or talk about our organization, but to open up the dialogue for all of you. It was relayed to me, and what's on the slide is some of your internal survey results, and that you have to plan for your lifestyle as you age. It may be valuable to spark the conversation and begin to understand the landscape a little bit better. I'll do my best to provide an introduction to seniors' housing options and discuss some of the issues critical to us all. So, looking at your survey results, they reflect the greater population. There we go. They reflect the greater population. Most seniors will try and stay in their home, and a large percentage of seniors, 80%, own their own home or apartments. And this is often referred to as aging in place. When support is required, it typically starts with family and then third-party service, some sort, maybe periodically, but not daily. That may increase to daily, where many try and access funded community supports. And where aging in place can prove challenging is away from city centers. As you can imagine, the labor force is more scarce remotely, and there's a lot of inefficiency in driving and servicing more rural communities. It's expensive for health authorities, but even if you did it privately, it becomes prohibitive. Now, seniors, and as they enter an incapacitation direct to their own needs, changes in the narrative occur. It will start to involve others in the decisions, and acuity is the biggest driver in tapping into funded and community supports. Acuity, either via an acute health event or declining health, typically changes the narrative from a choice in lifestyle to need-driven decisions. And this is often taking place in a crisis mode. Much of the health system is actually set up to address things in acute crisis. To put another way, even if being proactive, the supports available systemically only become available when things have escalated. This might be the necessary framework, but it's very frustrating, and so many do not know where to turn for help. So why would someone choose seniors housing? Well, at the independent end of the spectrum, it would be for lifestyle. Freedom from looking after the maintenance of a detached home, preparing meals, and transportation. Also important drivers are safety, community, and connection. It's ultimately these three where congregate living should provide the most value. We are social beings. As much as we all need private space to retreat to and recharge, there is dramatic data about the detriments of isolation on both mental and physical health. And there may be advancements coming in technology and AI that greatly improve health monitoring and companionship, but for now, humans need humans. Most congregate settings are looking to empower choice, stoke purpose, and possibility. Oh, apologize, I've lost the advancement of the slide there. There we go. Thank you very much. Some are pretty downright swanky and far from the perception of losing independence or that they're an end of the road. So let's look through some of these housing types. 55 plus communities. They're not as common in Canada as they are in the US. They may be referred to as retirement communities with golf courses and synonymous with retirement, but they're not typical of what you might find here in Canada. Independent living is aimed at a lifestyle which will resemble condos with full kitchens, possibly an a la carte service option, but you also have shared amenities. And then a distinction not often referred to as independent serviced or supportive living, where you will find more use of wellness services, activity calendars, and potentially some supports. About 30% of seniors in ISL will start to bring in their home supports in this setting, and it being unregulated, operators are not able to provide assisted living supports here. So it needs to be with a third party or family. Registered assisted living is where we start to see a greater degree of displayed needs. Most residents will need a full service environment, as the suites rarely provide cooking facilities. They may have kitchenettes, but typically 3 meals are typically provided. There's often a care package or a minimum required to carry clinical staff complements, and those range from medication reminders, medication management, assistance with daily acts of living, such as getting dressed, possibly bathing, and it could go so far as to help with financial aspects or mental health. However, this setting and type of care will still be supportive and not prescriptive. It is also not an acute setting and won't have 24-hour nursing. The Assisted Living Registry is the body that oversees and reviews enforcement of the regulations on the model, and the funded side of this model needs to go through a health authority case manager with an application for financial subsidy and qualification. You can access it privately. Again, the key here is that it will be scheduled healthcare service and support and not responsive. The next level is where we introduce licensing and the Residential Care Act. With that comes less flexibility and fewer freedoms. A private family pay environment will most likely afford more home-like environment and tailored with more hospitality in their service. Private for-profit companies can engage in health authority contracts to deliver service, so you may find some of these hospitality models in the options, but typically environments are much more clinical in feel and setting. And acuity is high, with higher prevalence of incontinence, signs of dementia, and care plans that no longer are just 1 or 2 areas of support, but often complex. Hence, this model can be referred to as complex care. One more in that realm is memory care. It falls under the LTC license, but is possibly a misnomer. It captures dementia care broadly, but because of this is where Alzheimer's is served, it became known as memory care. These settings, however, are not solely focused on memory. Being quite specialized, it often requires a very different setting on delivery and way to interact with residents, so sometimes these units are completely separate. Thus far, we are seeing more innovation in private pay for this model, but very specialized and very expensive to run. And the palliative setting can be long-term, but typically final stages of a terminal illness. Individuals do not always need a special place in which to do this. It can occur in the home, but may require advanced narcotics and nursing. There are not enough of these centers, and you won't see many private options, as they tend to be attached to hospitals. Now, a couple slides of some broader data on the demographics. The first shows a distribution of 2011 on the left and 2021 on the right. And the staggering thing here happens where you see the red circles as the baby boomers and aging demographic move towards the right. In the 2021 slide or data on the right, you can see we now have a tsunami of sorts of those over the age of 65, as well as the majority of those no longer in the workforce. This is driving immigration. We're seeing more immigration than we ever have before, but honestly, it's necessary in order to replace this workforce. That will have impacts on housing demand, and we're already discussing and seeing that in the broad sectors. This slide is specific to 65 and over cohorts distributed across the province, and it might be difficult to see from your screens, but the key here is just in the change of pace in specific locations. So for example, mid-Vancouver Island, you have a forecasted growth model in the light green area, which is significantly more than it was in the last 5 years. So whether it's migration into those zones, whether it's naturally people exiting the workforce, we're seeing demand in some of these rural areas. And if you remember, I mentioned earlier that we may have challenges with aging in place models in those areas. Now, certain areas like Courtenay Comox, there are retirement residences, there's hospitals, there's things that can service. But if population burgeons in those areas, I think it's going to be a challenge, at least today, at least at this point, which is why it needs to be part of the conversation. We do have a metric. Most industries and sectors have metrics on how you supply the demand that might be there. And seniors housing only supplies about 8% of all seniors. It's a small allotment of housing and service. Most will try and stay home. But of that number, you do get certain areas, let's say like Kelowna or the Okanagan, where the data shows somewhere around 11 or 12%. And that typically is because you're getting people moving into the more urban center from surrounding areas that wouldn't be in normal census results. Now, how is our sector and how are operators responding to this? Well, you have to keep up with that 8 to 10% to try and supply housing just to maintain the current demand. It's not for everyone, but we still need more of it. Here you're seeing some results and projections on the supply side of things and what is going to be required in the next few years. The data that's on the far right in blue in these various areas is 2033, so that's 10 years out. And if we just think of how long it takes to bring something to market, it takes about 5 years on average to bring a building. I've seen them in excess of 10 years, and it's very rare if you can get it out of the ground and ready for occupancy in 3 years. So let's use 5. If we use somewhere like Vancouver, which is in the center there, we're going to need 2,300 new units in 10 years. And so that an average building, a new building might be 150 units. And so we're looking at, 15 new builds. Well, if they take 5 years to build, it means we would need to have a bunch of those applications currently approved. And I only know of 6. So I think this is a collective concern just on I don't expect people to change the models that are out there. Everything is necessary. Everything is required that currently exists, plus more. We really do need a concerted effort to bring more funded projects aboard and also private choices for those that make the choice. But if we don't get on this, if we don't start supplying, we're definitely going to have a challenge. And then some other areas of interest, I think we're going to go to Q&A, but before we get there, just things that often come up are, what drives the cost sometimes around, private, independent living or even care residences. And like Tim mentioned earlier, it's in the land. It's the real estate side of the equation. So you can imagine West Vancouver is simply more expensive than Chilliwack to provide the exact same option. Now, you are more likely in West Vancouver to see enhanced service packages and probably amenities that you wouldn't find elsewhere. But the bottom line is it's simply real estate driven. Also, funded housing and care. It may be provided for profit providers under a government contract, but low-income supports are available directly through health authorities in a partnership with different entities like BC Housing, or potentially support from CMHC programs that you might not see, but they'll be there. They'll be funding things behind the scenes. The subsidy comes in joint with the health authorities providing a care subsidy or portion, BC Housing providing a subsidy, and then a small charge to the resident based on income, which potentially, if qualified for, other programs may fill some of that gap, things like SAFER, which is the subsidy assistance for elderly renters. So in closing, as much as it deals with a stage of life that needs life and needs shared by all, it is fairly specialized. Much of the public do not know the options, the governing regulations, and where to access the information. And to be honest, the deeper you dive, the more nuance and depth there is. So I advise you to begin to explore now, steer your own future, have the conversation with loved ones when an event or crisis potentially arises. It is more manageable ahead of those times. Emotions will run high and your entire family, and the discussion will pay dividends for all those involved. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Graham, for providing that insight into this really important topic and the role that the members of the BC Seniors Living Association play in meeting the needs. As you say, it's a multifaceted solution to a multifaceted problem. So we've got a few moments now to ask you some questions, and I had a couple of preliminary questions that have been submitted that I'm going to modify a little bit because I think you did a good job addressing the first one I want to talk about, and that is the time it takes to, as you say, put a hole in the ground and then have something come out of it. And there's so much work that happens, I know, before you dig that hole. To get in the hole is a major accomplishment. And so my question there is, what are the factors that are delaying even getting started in digging that hole?
Yeah, great question. Some of it is zoning, but I think one of the challenges we've had as an industry and an association is promoting the social value and the differences between seniors housing and, let's say, condos. Let's say it's independent living where you might be putting kitchens in all these units, but the buildings themselves operate differently. One, they're large employers. The infrastructure might be different. It's providing a ton of amenity, and it's rental housing as opposed to owned condo. There are strata models out there for seniors, but typically most of it is rental housing. So municipalities, I'm not sure fully understand the differences. I mean, it's easy to say, but when we're doing those applications, there seems to be a misunderstanding in what's being applied for. They see the sector as condos and that kind of housing, and it's clearly not. There's clearly a difference. So some of the things that are affecting, let's say, a developer or operator's ability to bring that to market would be some of the amenity requests or requests for, we can certainly supply the senior services. There might be an affordability option that could fold into it, but from an application perspective, we can't supply some of the things that might be normally asked for in a condo development. So some of those are happening. I do think over the last decade or so, there's been a little bit more of a developer versus the municipality and the municipality versus the developer approach, and that's nothing to do with seniors housing. That's just, I think, common out there where both sides are trying to protect themselves. The developer needs to come out of the ground with, managing, certainly in the current environment, rising costs, and then the municipality is trying to get as much as they can in return for a cohesive development, plans that are going to be beneficial to living in that area. So what you see with seniors housing sometimes is a stalemate where seniors don't want to live in the periphery of a municipality. You've seen terrible things like, being forced towards, farmlands and, literally away from everything. And then you're seeing challenges like the labor comment we made, where, if you're trying to build something new in West Van, well, there's not affordable housing there currently. And so as an operator, it's a big concern. It's how do I bring employees that are often coming from Langley across two bridges to work in a residence that I've just opened? So we're really trying to create that conversation cohesively with the province, the municipalities, and work together on maybe providing workforce housing. We did submit something to the committee, the Select Standing Committee, for a potential tax credit if we were bringing workforce housing, as opposed to just an affordable housing option as part of the application. Maybe it would be specific to workforce so that we could support, that for the whole area.
Well, that's good insight on some of the background there. And you've sparked me to pick up another question that I had, because you brought up the word workforce, and we know how important that is. We know what a challenge it is for restaurants or coffee shops or anybody in these major centers to hire people because the cost of living is so high. It's very difficult for businesses to keep their lights on while they're paying people enough money to live in these very expensive places. And as we think about how much challenge it is to care for seniors, as I said, when their family members try to do it, they know how difficult it can be and the kind of skill level that's required. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic of finding a workforce to staff these facilities to operate at the level that you need to?
Yeah, it's becoming very, very difficult. I think the real estate aspect is playing a huge role. Often people just can't live close to where they work, and something happened through the pandemic. There's certainly a stress that we all went through and shared, and some are leaving industry because of that. It was just such a pressure cooker. But on the flip side, I think there's something just in the general populace where they're not wanting to commute. So there's other drivers, not even just the real estate side and being able to find something close enough, but people just not wanting to spend all their time in a car or try and, get to work. Now, it's being backfilled by some of this large immigration that I mentioned earlier, but we need more of it. There's a large exodus from the workforce, and so the industry is pivoting to try and work with organizations like the Immigration Employment Council of BC. They just spoke at our conference about the resources that are available to tap into immigration streams, but also how we can train people quickly to try and get them in place. Some of the jobs may be considered not as skilled. Maybe it's a concierge or something that doesn't require a clinical background. But they're no less valuable. There's a sensibility in this sector that everyone has to have, and just from my experience over time, if they don't have it, they leave it, and they leave it quickly. And we often are attracted to the hotel industry. Sometimes it's a competition a little bit with some of the services that we share. But you quickly see that in our industry, there has to be an emotional connection to the services being provided. It's not transactional. It's the residents' homes, and that completely changes the game. So there's a big sifting of applicants, I think, that occurs naturally as it happens. But like everyone else, we just don't have enough, and we're working at it.
Well, and that sparks some of the discussion, I think, the hot button discussion that comes up about standards of care and so on. And there's a perception, perhaps, that for-profit facilities must just be doing activities that generate the most dollars. I did notice on your website that you had, you can correct me as the terminology, but a code of ethics and so on, standards of care that you expect out of your members. I'm wondering how that overlays with what we've just been talking about that looking for people who have that caregiving personality, that posture towards the people they're serving, and finding people who are appropriate to take on those roles.
Yeah. Yeah, happy to discuss that. It's something that's often, I think, a misconception. I'll be honest, I'm not going to divulge, profit margins or things of that nature, but there isn't really much of a margin in care. It simply is misunderstood, and it's so expensive to provide. I mean, whether you have RNs on staff or whatever it is, the cost of labor is so high that it's a bit of a loss leader. From a business perspective, it's just not a huge thing. Where it is important to an investment, if someone's doing that, is an occupancy, right? If you're full, then there's possibly a way to eke out a margin. But if someone's not full, the costs are too large. So that's the care side. That's really not, I mean, I've worked in that realm, but that's really not what I'm here to discuss. I'm more representing independent living, assisted living kind of approach. And in that sense, it's a bit more of the real estate. As I said, if you have properties in West Van, things of that nature, then the service component won't be as impactful to the business model as it might be, let's say, even in Kelowna. Now, as we went through the pandemic, we had a wage leveling exercise, which was brought in by the provincial government to try and stabilize labor. And so I think it was very, it did what it was intended to do. And then now the challenge a little bit is, what will it do to rates potentially for new residents as they move in? These things are, if there's a sensation aspect from government subsidy and they need to come off of this, then ultimately that reflects in rates for residents. So I think it's been good, but it's changed some of the parity, right? There was always an understanding that, look, if you lived in, let's say, Cranbrook, that life isn't as expensive there as it is in Vancouver, and so that there might be a wage differential. Whereas now you're seeing kind of this, broad and even approach, which is driving some of the challenge, I think, for operators to provide in certain zones anyway.
Okay, and boy, I've got to say, you've got a knack of anticipating the next question that came in, because the next question, and it's something we get quite often whenever we're talking about services, because we have members all across British Columbia. 47 branches, or 17,000 people are spread out everywhere. So because the population of our province is bottom heavy, if I can put it that way. That's not a very good image, but we tend to live in the south of the province. Some of the charts you showed didn't seem to go much far north of Kamloops. And so immediately we got the hot button question. What about northern BC? What about the Kootenays? And so I would imagine by dint of population, there's going to be less activity up there in terms of the number of facilities. But would your association have engagement in the regions of northern BC, Kootenays, places like that? Maybe you could comment that for yourself, but also for the sector in general.
Sure. Yeah, we do. We have members from BC Yukon area. We have Smithers. There's certainly the Northern Health Authority, Prince George, and even into the Kootenays and Cranbrook and areas along the mountain range. Yeah, members operate there, but to your point, there's not a lot of inventory. And so, traditionally, had there been one in an area, in a small municipality, it would be enough to service. But I think if we see migration into those areas, where I think we're going to see cost of living issues and people wanting to just find a more approachable path to housing and homes, there's going to need to be municipal plans for these. And these are not necessarily rich municipalities. They're not just, can't turn on a funded stream and all of a sudden, pay for new developments with taxes. So they're going to have to figure out how to work with private operators, see if some operate in those areas. I do know of an operator, in the Kootenays that has about 5 or 6. And so, they exist and they may want to expand. But traditionally, it's been left to private market to bring these things to market. The governments haven't been, very innovative. So they've supplied, but I wouldn't say that they're innovative products per se. But I think we're going to see that change.
Okay, well, in a moment, I'm going to bring in our guest, Sarah Goldvine from BC Housing, but I just had one final question for you, Graham, and it's a very open-ended one where you will not give me a precise answer, but that's okay. In my estimation, it took us about 40 years to get into this mess. if things go really well and we really all work together to solve that, what kind of timeline do you see it taking for us to really right the ship in terms of having a more stable demand supply balance in terms of good housing options for seniors?
Yeah, it's going to take collaboration. It's going to take public approval. I mentioned at the beginning of kind of my presentation that the purpose of the private side of things is to provide choice. It's a free market idea. You either like it or you don't, and you choose it or you don't. It's completely up to the public. Sometimes I feel like it gets villainized, and I'm not here to defend either side of that equation, honestly. But rationally, we just need to all participate. We just all need to work together to supply housing in all aspects. If our products are attractive and we're better, maybe we could attract more people to them. And if we attract more people to them, it potentially frees up, a single family dwelling unit that has a single occupancy of someone living alone. And that could be developed into a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex like the government has plans for currently. So it's a small piece of the pie, but it's an essential piece that needs to be there. We just need more of it.
Okay, well, thanks so very much, Graham, for taking time to join us and educate us a little bit about what it's like to work in your sector and for all the work you do for the seniors you serve. Thank you very much.